Good afternoon, I'm Dr. Hassan Fathy, graduated in 1992 as an architect from Cairo University, got my master's in Islamic art and architecture from the American University in Cairo, and got my PhD from Edinburgh College of Art School of Architecture in urban conservation and urban management. I am delighted to be with you today in order to explain and to introduce one of the typologies of that characterize the Islamic architecture and mainly domestic architecture in Cairo. I am focusing on the Palatial architecture, and this is kind of a special design of the Islamic architecture as early as maybe the Pharaonic period. If we can see, this model is from the Egyptian museum. It's from the ancient kingdom, and it just shed light on the living areas with the upper part and units with the preceded by the courtyard. As we can see, this is much closer to the reality that was a courtyard surrounded with the inner gardens and with the habitual spaces surrounding the pool or the water feature, the different units of the house. This is a reconstruction of what was really there. This continued after and was up until the time maybe of the Fustat, which is the first Islamic settlements during the decline of the Byzantine influence, the Byzantine state, and then the advent of the Arabs and their occupation of Egypt. As we can see, these are the ruins of the Fustat area, which is beside the Babylon fort, the Roman fort or the Byzantine fort, and the houses in there. Still, we can see these are the remains of the water basin. The heart of the courtyard is exactly the house that we saw before in ancient Egypt. So the tradition is always there. The courtyard is there with the water basin and maybe a canal or a channel that is bringing the water from the inner habitual area, which is the units where we have like T-shirt like plan with the T-shape area, the portico and the main habitual area, flanked by two annex chamber overlooking the courtyard with the inner pool, and they're surrounded by the other units. This is like a neighborhood or a small neighborhood in winding streets of Cairo. This is more and more of these areas or this neighborhood like a cul-de-sac leading to different units, and definitely we would have this bent entrance leading to the courtyard in a broken way, so you don't have to get a direct visual access to the courtyard for the privacy. I am taking you to this interesting example. As I told you, there is always a fountain, and definitely you can see the 45-degree chamfering for the water basin. This reminds you of something, BG community? I guess it is. So we can see that it's connected with a channel. This channel is for a duct that is from a wind catcher, bringing the blazing air of the north direction, catching the air and then pouring it into a jar or another water jar that is cooling as air conditioned, but it's in a primitive way that is bringing this cool air and influxing in the whole units with the hot air to be released within the courtyard. Can we see some good examples still surviving until today? Unfortunately not in Egypt, because most of these examples we are talking about the 8th century on up until the 12th century, which is the Fatimid Empire, and the Fatimids really ruled up to Sicily. They controlled Sicily, they controlled many parts of North Africa up to the Eastern Mediterranean, and then they started to recede by the Crusaders' attacks by the late 11th century. But what I'm exhibiting here is a good example of what we can see from the kind of architecture that we can see here, that is a portico leading to the inner part, and that was surmounting it. This example is the Ziza Palace in Sicily, and it is, though it is not built by the Fatimids, but it still preserves the same traditions, the same domestic and palatial architectural traditions that was followed even by the non-Muslims. Normans who ruled as early as the 12th century and the 13th century in Sicily. Those Norman kings were even got the court language was Arabic because that was the prestigious language of the period, and they even financed the Muslim geographer Idrisi to draft the Atlas of the world. As we can see from this example, we can see the portico is in there as the one that we saw in Fustat, but it's more elaborated because that is like a summer seat for the king of Sicily, the Norman king of Sicily, with a channel and a water basin within the courtyard, and the chadorwan or the fountain cascade in here in order to please the air, and in the summer seasons in order to give it definitely a magnificent, adding the water and the water sound and rattling sound, as well as the shape of the water cascaded, as well as enjoying the summer season time. These are drawings from the following periods from the Renaissance, but we can see that Ziza Palace in itself with the stalactites and everything that is very much reminiscent of the Islamic architecture that you might find in the Moresque architecture, in the even the Byzantine or this kind of Islamic architecture under Byzantine influence at the glass mosaic here, etc. Closer look in order to just shed light on that. We saw some examples of this work with the Byzantine influence in the Great Mosque of Damascus, the stalactites becoming very common in the Andalusian architecture. All such milieu and richness of ornaments was quite apparent here. As we can see, this is not a seat or a throne. Actually, this is a cascade of the water. This is the cascade where the rattling sound is happening on a zigzag curved panel of marble, and then the canal is in here, and we can see this chamfered 45 as if I am creating this kind of a lovely movements for the air and bringing the Biogeometry into the space in order to enjoy the space and this majlis or this seating area, main seating area of the palace. The palace is confronted by the big courtyard with the water features and vegetations and lushy gardens, of course. Exactly like this is the seat that used to be here, which is a throne room on Muhammad Ali's, on the citadel of Saladin in Cairo. And that was the location of the mosque that was built in 1830s in the 19th century by the ambitious Viceroy Muhammad Ali. And we can see that the seat is in there, and these are the main portico overlooking the courtyard was in front of the palace, or this part of the palace. Of course, the palace is composed of different parts and different areas, but the main seating area was in here, as we can see, in order to receive the ambassadors and the officials, in order to just have or accommodate the throne as a main throne area. But this is not exactly what we are looking for. We need to see the transition of the process and what really happened to the, what we call it, the Cairene Qa'a, or the Cairene main hall, the main constituent of the Cairene domestic architecture, or the Cairene domestic typology of the house. We can see that this is, as I said, the main Iwan, which is the main vaulted area or the main seating area, and the portico and the two annexed chamber overlooking the open courtyard with the water basin. Remember, the 45-degree is something very essential for us. I'm giving you another good example, but it is from religious architecture that is very much influenced also by the domestic architectural example. This is a monastery for the hermits, for the Sufis in Islamic architecture in Gamaleya, called Babers II, Babers al-Jashankir Khanqa, which is a monastery, which is like a special units for the students for theology. And we can see like a tomb in here, but there is, or a shrine, and there is an entrance, a bent entrance leading indirectly to the courtyard, and the main majlis is in here and in here, and you can find the others in here, but this is more screened with these kind of special openings and these fenestrations, but these units are dedicated to other chambers and leading to the upper floors for the other units to accommodate those hermits. But what is really quite interesting is to see this kind of two wind catchers at the end of this Iwan, or at the end of this seated area, because it is completely blocked by the neighbor premises. So they are from these corners catching the air and influxing the air in order to communicate and to influx in the whole building and to be released the hot air from the courtyard in here. However, this house that is like a main sitting area to an exit chamber and the portico and the courtyard and the other constituents of the house like a kitchen or a latrine and the other components really changed with time, as we see in the other example. In the other example, the more hot weather dictated the fact that we might need to shade even the courtyard, something like with the types that happened in the Roman villas that was semi-closed or semi-covered. And this theory was introduced by the renowned architect Hassan Fathy in the, and as mentioned in the book Clock International de Caire 1969, which is the Clock International for the memory of the 1,000 year of the life of the city of Cairo that was held in 1969, or celebrating such an occasion as early as 1969, when he mentioned that such a lovely good example was the beginning of the typology of having this courtyard covered in this example. It's interesting enough that this is originally a house in the 11th century was built, and this, thank God that this is the only example that's still surviving until today. But as we can see, the courtyard, as we can see here, it is covered, but we can see some good example of that, which is like the door shutters. There's a giant door shutters and the different multi-stories that is accommodating the other chambers or the other units of this house, but they are covering here, but they have clerestory windows in order to release the hot air and bringing light inside. This is in order to overcome the sandstorms and in order to make this kind of passive architecture air conditioning that is guaranteed by having the wind catcher from here, the wind catcher from there. So definitely I'm influxing good cool air, and as if I am bringing high pressure in here and the low pressure is happening here, and definitely on the upper level where the air is released from the upper part. Here happened the case, here happened the transition, and in this example actually it is today the convent of the sisters of the Egyptian Copt sisters of Mary Gerges, known as St. George, the Egyptian St. George, in the Babylon Fort area. Still continuing and still seeing the examples that we started to see as the component is like that, the courtyard is becoming more closer. This early example, as early as the 14th century, we started to see this, and even some good remaining examples, but they are in very ruinous condition. But this is the earliest example that we can trace back the coverage of the inner part, which is the courtyard, and it's becoming like a recessed area for services and circulation that is serving the seating area and the main salon and reception, that maybe other units on the mezzanine or the upper levels will be overlooking this part of the house. This is the entrance of this. Actually, what I introduced at this qa'a was Aline Aq, the daughter of Nasr Muhammad ibn Qalawun from the 1340 AD, from the 14th century. And here I am showing you how things really turn. So the courtyard is covered, it's becoming more and more compact because the circulation is needed within that part. So the seating and the dwellings and activities are happening on the different sides surrounding that part, and the clerestory windows are there to guarantee the illumination, spell of lights coming, and as well as release of the hot air. And of course, without the shutters, in order to control this kind of problems, how it happened during the winter, and definitely would guarantee the movement or the aerodynamics within the unit. Like, for example, this axonometry is explaining that. Of course, you might have the cascade and the shadr one, we call it the shadr one, which is the Persian name or the Persian influence for the name. That is where the water is cascaded on the carved marble slab, and then take it into the channel or channel it into the pipe that might be paved or might be exposed in order to reach to the fountain, and everything is with a mill by a buffalo or a donkey down there in order to guarantee the circulation of the water is happening while people are entertained within. And we can see the upper levels for the different units and the other dwellings for people are entertaining, maybe for the female members of the family, for the gender segregations that would happen also during this time, for the kind of conservative considerations and the practices of the canonical orders of the Islam, and the release of the hot air is guaranteed by that part. We could see that the last end of the qa'a, which had this kind of protruded bay windows, and this qa'a or this part of the house is elevated simply because it is from the first level. because it is based on this kind of, because it's a townhouse, actually not easy and not just a palace, for the leasing of this in order to create income for the prince, who's also from the mid 14th century. That is the inner part. This is the water feature as it was. That is the last end. On the other side is the bay windows that I told you about from this example. More images about this qa, or this kind of the constituent of the house. But remember, this is not the whole house. Before, it used to be the whole house. Now it is part of like the main salon of the whole house. This is the clerestory windows, and we can see it is even more and more elevated. As we can see, this is like the wind catcher that is catching the air in order to attract the air, influxing it in order to just give it with a speed, like what happened with the blow or throw mechanism of the air, and how it would move and be released when it is hot from that part, exactly like this. And if we focus on here, it's exactly a kind of like fluid dynamic would create vortex within that part accordingly, which would increase for any measurements. What would we discover as the BG3 definitely guaranteed would be intensive in here if we apply our measurements. And again, the wind catchers or so is not like a new innovation introduced to the Cairene architecture as early as 12th century or so. As we can see, these drawings is coming from the maybe New Kingdom and from the paintings on the tombs, and we can see very good examples still standing for that. As early examples, we could see the streets as like when we have the architectural program of any building or for any domestic architecture, you might have this part which is a main constituent of the house, which is a qa, which is a main hall with a covered part, which is because we make it compact, but it's not any longer the whole house, the whole courtyard house. It became one compact part, which is the main salon or main living space, where you are, the furnishing is very flexible, it's like cushions, and it is appropriated, and then you are served within the central part, which used to be formerly centuries ago before open air, but now it is closed in order to just make the necessary service circulations, and then you serve it on the high with like one step higher level where you are entertained or so, and then you just have the other sections of the house surrounding it and the different units, because it was normally houses accommodating extended families, so each would have his own unit, like living unit, where he got his own miniature qa or miniature hall with an exit chamber for sleeping, as well as storage area and a latrine and cooking facility space. So with time, maybe this would start as the urbanization that would happen in many districts newly introduced according to the expansion of Cairo, and its long history, maybe it's the 12th century and 13th century, but not when it's becoming more and more intensified, then we started to see what used to be gardens started to be intensified. Maybe the property line started to be just modified according to the heir system or inheritance, etc. And then everything is done, but with securing a certain open air space that is a courtyard for all units to be well naturally ventilated and illuminated. The early phases of after the coverage and after for example, something like this, the proportions is quite huge, high. We can see, of course, is the realization of the cosmic proportions is guaranteed with the measurement, something like phi with the boundaries of such a rectangle of that habitual part, or that this activities or dwelling part. This is the inner part, which is a bit huge with the water feature in here with the units in there, and then confronted by another unit like this. Houses and urban morphology is definitely guaranteed by having maybe houses that is divided because of the inheritance system, and because everybody is entitled to just take part of the house. So you can't have the earl system that we have it in Europe, but you would have something different, that you might divide the house, you might reach some, but when you divide that, there is no written municipality order, but there is a constitution that you definitely won't violate the rights of your neighbors, you definitely would have and respect openings or other development that happened by your neighbors preceding your intervention. And when you have the consent, if anybody is violating, if you are violating the rights of others, that they can sue you and they can stop your development. So in this case, it is actually two houses combined together. This is known as Beit el-Razzaz. It is a house that is known as such because of the Ottoman period. So we're talking about after the 16th century. But it is two houses. Actually, originally that house that is predominantly Ottoman actually started from previous property by the Mamluk period. We're talking about the 15th century, which is the last quarter of the 15th century, combined with another one with huge loggia and with a huge hall, that the one that I exhibited before, and with high proportions because it is from an earlier stage from the 14th century. Both combined together, as I said, the property and the combination and the urban morphology was guaranteed as such. We can see also that is like an open courtyard, but the main constituent, as I explained, with its covered court, etc., surmounted by this lantern, is definitely a very good example here from the late 15th century. This one is Zainab Khatun, known as Zainab Khatun Mansion, from the end of the 15th century. And then retouched and modification happened to this house. So only the inner part of the qa'a or the hall is existing, as we can see, very elaborated, very fancy designs and proportions. Unlike the other half, which was definitely retouched, and the replanning happened to the whole house after. We can see also this good example for a house in the Amna bint Sabit from the 1540s. So we're talking about the first half of the end of the first half of the 16th century, and we can see the inner part and how the concentration of the floor exposed without being rugged or carpeted. So definitely this is for the circulation. You have the fantastic water feature, you have the transition from the square to the triangle, etc., in order to increase this magnificence of the place. They were performing that without understanding why they were doing that. And I will give a statement really about that. And we can see that the salon or the main dwellings that happened on that part, an exit chamber, connectivity to the loggia, which is the summer terrace overlooking the courtyard, that the hall is overlooking that. And this itself as an atrium with the other units overlooking that, in order to maximize the airing and the connectivity of the units, and the each unit overlooking something and enjoying, not even necessarily if they are not, that unit is not overlooking the inner garden or the inner court, at least they would be well lit, well aired. This good example is for Beit el-Razzaz, and we can see this huge qa'a. This is from the courtyard. So we have the houses that was a pentagonal court I told you about, Beit el-Razzaz. This is the part that is from the Ottoman period, and we can see how the qa'a is elevated in here, and how this part of it is depicted in here in order to show us the case. So we have the different parts, and this is the surrounding part where you are served while you are being entertained. It is not huge because it is from a later period. It is from definitely developed during the Ottoman period. But what is really interesting and why I'm exhibiting that is just to show you this kind of fenestration and the interiors, etc. These structural pillars, but definitely you don't have to make all wall bearing, but the wall bearing part that is the structural part is this kitf binai, or the pillar needed. So in between, when I have, it's definitely cupboards and storage place, and each storage place, each panel got to be ornamented and decorated for a purpose, for a cause. And it was like a kind of it's like not a constitution, it's not a written constitution, but there the architect was the culture itself. So the culture and those builder and even those owners were intellectual enough in order to apply why they have been always belonging to their culture, in order you cannot build a house unless they are following these kind of considerations, practices, designs, etc. They do not have modules, but definitely they have their own voids and got to take some certain space, format, etc. in order to accommodate their activities. That's an inner courtyard, and as we can see, the different apartments for the different members of the extended family there. This corridor, this actually plain part is actually a corridor. It's an open air corridor to secure the privacy of some members of the family, like you cannot see your cousin's wife exposed. So she's secured in her privacy, and the design is designed in order to guarantee this kind of privacy that occur with your dwellings, etc. You can see even the bent entrance leading to the inner courtyard, which is an inner garden, and this is like a study room, a communal facility. This is the whole, the main constituent for which we are exhibiting the main important part of the house. And there is a different, as you can see, here is another one which is a more compact, and there another one. This is another one because this is a unit, but got a miniature of this, like a special salon where you are served, being dined and repose during the daytime and enjoy your meals, enjoy receiving your guests, etc. as member of as an independent unit, where you can have all your activities within such a kind of serenity space. And you see the amount of compartmentalization and intricated design. More of the images of the geometrical patterns and how they were extremely attractive. Again, there were two principles for the ornamentation in general in Islamic art and architecture, and for that read Oleg Grabar, Formation of Islamic Art, Harvard University, and they had two principles: multiplicity from unity, meaning that one motif, but we can just vary it as a kind of referring to the oneness or symbolizing the oneness of God, but I'm making the I'm sorry for that. So we make this kind of variations in the geometrical patterns, etc. So it's like this kind of symbological or this kind of Sufi interpretations, and definitely horror vacui, which is a very interesting term, but it said that plain spaces are not left alone. They got to be retouched and they got to be filled with this kind of what would enrich it. In some dissertation, we call this as a kind of energy, as filling the walls with energy. So it's a visual energy by adding meanings to the space. So there is no space, but you're turning the space into a place. You're turning surface into a pleasant plateau or pleasant panel. Like many ornamentation, many materials, of course, polychromic designs in order to enrich the interiors. And we can see also from the examples that I've just exhibited, its courtyard. And I'm exhibiting this part from the apartment of the patriarch of the family, where he had his own hall with an exit chamber. This is like the patriarch, like the grandfather's unit. It's overlooking from two sides, from the courtyard in the middle, which is an inner garden, and the kitchen garden at the back side, which is huge, in fact. And he's enjoying that, very well aired, and it is nothing but a kind of compact qa'a, which is like the constituent or the architectural type, the main constituent of the Cairene domestic architecture. And we can see that he got no fountain in here, true, but he got the a lantern that is releasing the hot air above, and he got his exit chamber, and the dwellings and everything is happening in here. The idea for the extended family is that you just have the main salon, main activities, main places that you are not use yourself always in your unit. So it's a communal facilities, but definitely in your units you are entitled to have your own habitual spaces somewhere where you can be well entertained, receiving your own personal guests. But if you have a common occasion like a feast or so, then you would be sharing the big hall or the big ceremonial hall. Up until almost the end of the 18th century, we started to see the influences received from Europe and the tendency to be more influenced by the culture of Europe. As we can see, this tower appeared in Topkapi, which is the seat of ruling in the Ottoman Empire in Istanbul. Definitely, if you are influencing in Istanbul by the Prussian influence with this kind of Germanophonic empire, then definitely the mood for the whole provinces, including Egypt and Cairo, of course, would happen inevitably. up until the mid-19th century, when we started to see that the seat of ruling is no longer the Topkapi, but it started to be totally European, which is Dolma Pasha, and this is the gate of Dolma Pasha. So even before the erection of Dolma Pasha and the taking over, but just assuming the total European appearance for the empire, and the emperor himself is seated in Istanbul, we started to see this house, which is Muhammad Bek al-Alfi. That was the seat of Napoleon Bonaparte during his invasion to Egypt by the turn of the 19th century. So as early as 1798, he took this place as his own place. The design, which is very flexible design, and the constituents in there, but it is veneered with a kind of a more Balkan-like or Provençal neoclassical, which is the influences, the European influence that started to show its face in Cairo as early as that part. Up until we reached to the ruler who came to rule first and on behalf of the Ottoman Empire, but of course he came after Napoleon invasion, so he made like a truce on allying with the French, so he became the man of France in the region and in Egypt precisely, because that was the backbone of the Middle East during the time, and definitely the man really assumed complete secularization program. So part of it is visually looking down upon the traditional architecture that was more ecological, that was more one with its nature, etc., to adapt more, leaving this or deserting this, for example, like for example that was Rosetta, a city on the northern coast, Rosetta, where they found the Rosetta Stone, and to adopt this Kavala-like or this Provençal neoclassical like in Bulgaria and in Balkan countries. He brought back from his native land this kind of design that is his house or his palace in Alexandria. So he's creating Alexandria that was completely dumped and completely ignored by that time, because Alexandria, as we know it from the Cleopatra time and from the Fatimid time, really eclipsed, and nothing was remaining there already discovered. It was rediscovered later, and he started that as early as the early 19th century. Up until 1835, he established even a total European institution, which is l'ornato, which is the urban ornamentation, meaning that he got this kind of Italians. They were responsible for the planning and issuing contracts and making a kind of like a private sector town planning and town consent and managing the development of the city, to be completely the node of Europeanization, not only in Egypt, in the region, as early as 1835 and even before, because as you can see that he introduced his styles as early as that time. So that was burned in a great fire, and actually bombarded by the British also later. So it was replaced by another classical example. And we can see also some good examples of that part. And during that part, he never encouraged those laborers who were involved in the turned wood bay windows. And these were never designed to be glazed. In fact, it was the whole building was breathing one with his own ecology. The planning of the city is very much irregular to stop this sandstorms and maneuver with kind of ecological problems that we might endure in order to, because the cultural ecology was there, as I said, the architect with the culture itself, but instead he introduced this kind of bay windows with elongated fenestrations like neoclassical styles. That is a remaining example, a very good example, with like a sash window like, and during that time he introduces the glazing or the waxed paper imported from Istanbul. Even the classical buildings that had the typology and the old and traditional one started to look down on that and started to be Europeanized by adopting for its different wings or remodeling the existing wings with this kind of fenestrations and proportions, introducing even the Mediterranean balconies instead of that, and just adding these screens for the sake of privacy. So we consider this as a kind of transitional good examples. That is a very good example to explain this more, because that was the work of a friend of mine. He's a very good restorer, and he discovered this house and he purchased the house and restored it to one. He is uncovering the walls and trying to restore them. He discovered that though he saw that it's a kind of, this is a Venetian shutters, or the la jalousie in French, which is the Mediterranean balcony and everything like that, totally European, but he discovered the layer of the Ottoman period for the building that was built in the 17th century, but it was completely remodeled in the 19th century. Up until that we reached to the complete change of face, like a new look for the architecture institutions, and even those well-off started to completely adopt a certain imagery for themselves, for their houses, for their lifestyle, to be completely Europeanized. This is like a loggia and the entertaining place, which is in Chopra Palace, like a miniature Versailles for the new ambitious Viceroy, the man of France, which is Muhammad Ali. And as we can see, that facility is like a water dispensary for different neighborhoods. You normally have this as a water supply for the clean water supply and the wash water supply. And we can see that each station is really ornamented or decorated as early as mid-19th century with this kind of, already we call it the late Ottoman style, which is actually nothing but an Ottoman Rococo or a Rococo style, something that we might find in the Lodvik Palace, and all the sources of inspiration that really influences the Ottoman during the time, and accordingly we were also influenced by that. Muhammad Ali himself, in the process of the secularization in Egypt, really delegated many students in order to learn and to be Europeanized, to receive the European education. So when they returned back to be the intellectual elites who started to build what we can define in our modern history as modern Egypt and modern Cairo, they are established in Cairo, but we can see that they adopted a Palatial style, which is a central hall with the surrounding dining halls and the different halls, and with an inner staircase, maybe it is exposed, maybe it is concealed, and then leading to the upper floors for the sleeping area, like any villa that we might find in Europe. But for the sake of the more privacy, so there is a reception separated from the house in order to maintain this kind of, or to complement this conservative male and female and this gender segregation necessary for that period. Even that good example for the collective housing, which is an apartment building. So instead of having complete Mediterranean style balcony by the late 19th century, so it was a kind of a compromise for a good transitional example to be Mediterranean balcony in order to just be not exactly the mushrabiyya or the turned wood bay window, but it became like the French jalousie or this kind of provincial South France type of fenestration covering the Mediterranean balcony as a good example. Up until we reached it that everything is Europeanized. So when we started to see something Islamic like this, which in fact this for some critics, they are kitsch and they are nothing but a kind of the Orientalism of the period, because that was villas preferred by the Europeans who lived in Egypt or wanted to purchase a house for investments, because the country here in Cairo and Alexandria and many other parts of the city was heaven for the investors, and those investors came from everywhere. Like the money and the investments really was enormously received, well protected. Investment was guaranteed up until the mid 20th century. So this kind of architecture is nothing but European plan, but veneered with this kind of ornamentation in order to complement this romantic mood of ways of aspiration for the new owners, the European one, or those kind of inspired intellectual Egyptians, but they are adopting a certain Orientalism mood even in their preferences. So they are educated and living to be totally European, but when they prefer the Oriental, they are preferring it from the perspective of their fellow Europeans. So it's something quite interesting to see that when it happened really to see something like a revitalization of such principles of the architecture, of the domestic architecture and lifestyle of the real, genuine Cairene domestic architecture that is respecting its ecology, its culture, etc. It's not before really Hassan Fathy when he started to revitalize that. So his genius approach and designs are not really because of the vault and dome that people really limited him to, but in fact it was because he understood everything. Like in some TV interview he said that when I start to draft things, in fact he was following the same traditional facts and principles of the kind of the Cairene houses and the main qa'a and its proportions, etc. And when I develop that, so definitely if I have a certain width, then I have to respect that in the height, and then I just have to respect that in, for example, the cross ventilation. Actually that was a villa, a roof, a penthouse, but he built that inspired. It's a penthouse on a roof in Dokki, a district in the heart of Cairo, the European part of course. And he built this kind of a double height lantern for releasing the hot air, and with a malqaf, which is a wind catcher, in order to release the to catch the cold air, and in order to influx it, as influenced by this kind of 14th centuries example. And we could see also this kind of interior that is definitely more simplified than what we used to see, but definitely he's recalling this kind of influences in the interior, and the flexible style of interior and furnishing that is recalling the traditional craft, the spirit, but maybe in a mode with a flavor of a more modernish, stylish, with a melange of different styles together, in order to guarantee this kind of refinement. And definitely the intellectual elites of the 1960s on, which is up to 1980s, were really commissioning him to produce that. And this man's genius line of design is because he understood what was really the principles of the Islamic architecture, or responsible, like catching the DNA, and then he's developing his designs accordingly. Why I'm introducing this to you? That is my impression, and in fact, I used to study Islamic architecture, I used to study Islamic urbanism, I used to study the medieval, I used to study in order to just go for development, conservation, etc. But they were nothing but vocabulary, long one. I wanted to understand. In the School of History of Art and Architecture, they told me that we are not going to teach you why they were doing that. And I was in puzzle, and I wanted to understand. Not before, like 30 years ago, I started to introduce myself to the center of the biogeometry. And I wanted to know from the biogeometry, what is it, and just out of curiosity. And then I discovered with time, up until I became an alumni from the program, among those alumni of side discussions with them, with Professor Ibrahim Karim, etc. Then I started to understand what I've been developing my research about, this like touching the geometry, understanding the cosmic proportions, understanding why they are there, because this is all I could discover. Is just there is some patterns that is really existing. Maybe in religious examples, these are the courtyards of some religious architecture, where I can still find it in domestic architecture. I could see also the proportions that really controlled the pyramids, really existing in the lines and the proportions that is responsible for the evolution of the qa'a, which is the main hall, and the height is determined because of this kind of proportions and Pythagoras triangle. So, okay, if this is happening, and I know if I want to design it, I know that it's like encrypting, it's like the decoding in order to just have the AI design, and it would be generated this way. But why they were doing that? I wanted to understand. Why this horror vacui? Why this intricated geometrical patterns? Why the 45 angle? Thanks to PG, biogeometry gave me the answer. And I wanted to learn that. And thanks to you for being in such a community, because this way I took the whole vocabulary to make the language complete, because BG was the syntax I was missing and longing to discover. Thank you very much.